their policies still classified chokeholds as a defensive maneuver, even though those police chiefs told me, we consider it to be an example of deadly force, right? Equivalent to shooting someone. You need a high level of justification to use it, but the policy didn't reflect that. So they, when they responded to my request and looked over what I was asking for, they kind of realized, oh, we have this language in here that just, I guess, hadn't been caught in updates and was still there from I don't know how long ago. But so they are now, updating their policies to remove that.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. This discussion is brought to you in part by the Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, which supports our First Amendment and Free Press program, where we bring local journalists into the community, or in this case, online, to discuss their work and their role in our democracy. Today, we're joined by Paul Cuno-Booth from the Keene Sentinel. Paul, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Paul. I invited you on to talk about all of the excellent reporting you've done over the last several months related to use of force policies within law enforcement. But before we get to that, I do want to announce that applications for our 10th annual New England First Amendment Institute are now available at NEFAC.org. Paul, you were a fellow last year. Any words for those that are considering applying?
Yeah, highly recommend. First of all, I think I had about 2 years in a daily newsroom when I did it, and just the amount of technical skills I got out of it, kind of helping me go from having some of the basics down of just how to do, a really kind of run-of-the-mill news story, but then learning more about how to file those document requests, what to ask for, how to push back when someone resists. Thinking about what types of data governments have, how to analyze that data using spreadsheets and other tools. So I came away with so many, technical skills, and I think also just this overarching sense of really inspiration and a sense of how you can work investigative journalism, investigative techniques into your own daily practice. You don't need to be a member of the spotlight team, right? But just, City Hall beat reporting, thinking about what data can I get to enrich this story. Cops and courts, of course, so many documents in that beat, and how can you use them to enrich your reporting? So, and I've been using the techniques and the knowledge I gained from it over the past 9 months.
Well, thank you for that. It really is a unique program. It'll be held this year over the course of a week this fall, all tuition free. We accept 25 fellows. I encourage everyone to apply. Again, more information at NEFAC.org. Now, Paul, let's get to your reporting. The reason why you're here today, because you've done some great work when it comes to really getting into the weeds on use of force policies within law enforcement agencies in New Hampshire. Could you first maybe begin by telling us what is a use of force policy, and why are they important? Why do we, the public, need to know what these policies are?
Yeah, so a use of force policy is it's more or less what it sounds like. It's the internal police department policy saying, here's what guidelines govern the use of force when an officer is out there. What are the situations where they can use force on a subject, on a civilian? What are some of the restrictions on that force? And these are important because the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, has laid down some very general guidance about what makes force reasonable or not. And there's some somewhat more specific, but still pretty general language in New Hampshire state law about what makes use of force justified. But when it comes down to the specifics, that's really up to departments to flesh out. So are certain techniques allowed or prohibited in certain circumstances? Are officers told to not shoot at moving vehicles unless they have to, for example? Are officers told to, absolutely told not to use neck restraints, or is that addressed in the policy? Are officers supposed to try and de-escalate a call before using force if they can? Those are the sorts of things that each department is putting in the policies. The policy alone obviously isn't everything. It's also important, what training do you get that might go above and beyond what the policy specifically says? also, how well supervised our officers are to make sure they're actually following the training. But the policy is kind of the basis of that.
In this comprehensive look you took at all the different policies throughout all of the law enforcement agencies in New Hampshire, it really stemmed from an incident last year at Keene High School. Is that right?
That's right. And I can't claim credit for breaking the story. That was the union leader originally. But basically, what happened was a very short video surfaced on social media of a uniformed police officer who works at the school tackling a 15-year-old teenager. And we later learned this was a alleged vaping violation in a school bathroom. But all we had, was this clip of a student walking out into a hallway and then a grown man tackling him from behind. So the police put out a statement saying, we reviewed this. It was justified according to our policies and procedures. The officer tried lesser means to get this individual to comply. He refused to give his name and was, walking away from the officer. And so then he escalated to this level of force. So obviously, I had questions. I wanted to know more about what specifically happened in this incident. So I requested the arrest report to get more kind of fact-specific information. But also, if they're saying this fit within our policy, the natural question is, what's in the policy? I figured the policy is just something they would be able to provide me kind of in a couple days, but it took 5 weeks and they redacted significant amounts. This is the Keene Police Department's use of force policy.
Paul, if we could pause right there, you said it took them 5 weeks to get back to you with this policy that's already prepared, that their officers are already operating under. Why so long? This seems like a document that they could easily just supply. It's something that they have on hand and that you would think all officers, would have memorized by now.
That's what I thought. But so when it comes to Keene, it's a somewhat larger community, so all of their records requests are routed through the city attorney's office. I doubt it took that long for the policy to go from the police department to the city attorney's office. That was probably pretty quick. But then I guess there's a process of a legal review and checking, what do we want to redact? And, and I'm not the only person requesting stuff, in fairness, so I don't know if it was kind of behind some other things in line. But I was, until I got the request back, I was wondering why it was taking so long, and then I saw that they had made these redactions and figured that's what they were spending that time on.
So you have a high school kid who was maybe vaping, tackled by a police officer in the school. Maybe it was justified, maybe it wasn't, but you ask for the use of force policy to get a better handle on whether or not the apprehension of this student, was justified. 5 weeks later, you get that policy and it's loaded with redactions. What kind of information was redacted? Could you get any sense as to what was being withheld?
I could get something of a sense just from the context, and they did recently release the full policy, so I was able to go back and see. But it was pretty clear from the beginning that they had redacted anything that mentions a specific technique. So, for example, tackling or what's called an arm bar, or using a pepper spray or a baton, or anything that's considered like a specific technique that an officer might use. That was redacted. Sections dealing with weapons were almost entirely redacted, so you couldn't see what weapons they're using or what guidance they're given about those weapons, whether that's restrictions or anything else. And then there was some stuff that just kind of baffled me. And looking at it later, there's a section about rendering medical aid to people who've been injured in police custody, which is a good thing to have in your policy. But they redacted parts of that. Essentially they redacted descriptions of people suffering from pepper spray injuries because that would reveal to me that police might carry pepper spray. There was another section that I didn't know what this was until months later. I did see the full policy. That was simply a paragraph pointing out that a particular federal statute allows police officers to carry weapons anywhere in the U.S., which, why you redact a reference to a federal statute, which I think is public record. I'm not sure what that was about. But most of it was, again, these Broadly speaking, things related to techniques, procedures, specific weapons.
And what was the specific reasoning given for these redactions? What did the police department say as to why they couldn't provide you, the public, right? Why they couldn't provide the public this information that you requested in its entirety?
Yeah, so the city attorney's office relied on two particular exemptions. They're actually federal FOIA exemptions that have sort of been adopted by the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Basically, one is about law enforcement techniques and procedures. This would be for example, if you have a very sophisticated crime fighting technique and you don't want to give people a way to evade that and get away with breaking the law, that sort of thing can be kept confidential. So they cited that. They also cited a separate exemption saying, law enforcement records whose release would endanger the safety or life of any person. And their argument was that if you reveal the techniques that officers might use to apprehend a subject, they can be better equipped to evade that force, which then escalates the situation, which then leads to greater use of force and greater potential for danger to everyone involved. I asked specifically, what the theory of the case is, how someone could use a use of force policy to better evade force by officers, whether there's any evidence that's happened elsewhere, and was not given any specific response.
So you took this experience and then you made similar requests of all police departments. Is that right?
That's right. So this initial article we were talking about came out in March, right at the beginning of the pandemic. Obviously got sidetracked with some other stuff for a while. But then, after the George Floyd death and the protests that we're talking about, of course, a range of things related to policing and race. But, part of the discussion really was focused on use of force policies and specific provisions, right? Neck restraints being the obvious one, but also things like, are you allowed to shoot at moving vehicles? Does the policy require you to de-escalate a situation if you can? Are officers who see colleagues using excessive force, are they duty bound to intervene? Do policies spell out these specific things? So I wanted to see, not just what Keene says, but what every law enforcement agency that we cover in southwestern New Hampshire, what their policies said about those things. So I did start requesting that I think about 30 agencies provide their policies.
And what kind of responses did you get? Did they all respond similarly to Keene? Were some more open than others? Did it vary? How exactly did it go from there?
It varied a whole lot. As of last count, I think about 22 of the 30 have provided their policies. Several denied my requests entirely, and I'm still waiting to hear from a couple of the smaller departments. One thing to note is that these policies do vary in the level of detail. So, some of the policies are less specific than Keene's. So, that's, maybe an argument why Keene might want to redact some things, but another department might not, just because of what specifically is in the policy. But some departments with fairly detailed policies did turn them over in full. Some were kind of resistant or initially denied my request or redacted things, but then later kind of came back and said, you know what, given the moment, given what we're hearing from the community, we believe transparency is important. So we're going to, turn this over after all.
And in fact, there were even a couple of chiefs, one of them in Keene, right, who through your request took another look at the policies and saw some things that they weren't entirely comfortable with and are now reconsidering.
That's right. So Keene and at least one or two other towns, their policies still classified chokeholds as a defensive maneuver, even though those police chiefs told me, we consider it to be an example of deadly force, right? Equivalent to shooting someone. You need a high level of justification to use it. But the policy didn't reflect that. So they, when they responded to my request and looked over what I was asking for, they kind of realized, oh, we have this language in here that just, I guess, hadn't been caught in updates and was still there from I don't know how long ago. But so they are now, updating their policies to remove that. It's important to note that people who work in police training in New Hampshire say, we just don't train officers to use any kind of neck hold at all. So it's possible that it just doesn't come up in New Hampshire. And so people didn't see the need to review these policies. But it is the sort of thing where, hypothetically, if an officer did use a chokehold and then the police chief wanted to kind of discipline them for that because it was out of what they were supposed to be doing for training, they might be able to point to that policy and say, hey, look, the policy says it's fine. So probably best to have those things up to date.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important part of this national conversation that we're having, because we now have this momentum, this push across the country for police reform. But I think a part of that gets overlooked is just asking for information, just shining a light on, in your case, use of force policies to see what's there. And sometimes just by through that request and showing the policy to the public, you can affect change. And speaking with other reporters who have had similar experiences, that just by making that request, they've affected change and have really prompted a level of accountability that wasn't there before. Has that been your experience as well?
That's right. And with this project, one thing that was really important to me was not just writing my own articles about this, which I have done, but also making all these policies public on our website. So we did publish something in mid-June that was a list of every department we requested and the full policies where we were provided them. Those that didn't provide policies, we gave their reasoning. So essentially, it's that sort of just creating this database of local policies. So if you're a citizen in a small town in this part of the state, you want to know what your town's policy says and whether it's adequate, how it lines up with some of these national reform efforts. You can go do that. I can't write a story on every single town individually, but the residents can now go do that and judge for themselves.
Yeah, that's such an important takeaway from all of this, is that most of us don't work in newsrooms. We don't have your very difficult job of being a journalist, but we are all citizens. We're all curious about what's going on. And I think we all do have the responsibility to oversee our government officials, including law enforcement. So go out, make those requests, ask for that information, and get a better sense as to whether or not law enforcement, in this case, is acting responsibly. So thanks for all the work that you've done, Paul. For those that are watching this video, I'm going to link to all of your stories and the work that you've done on our Twitter page. Our Twitter handle is 5freedoms. So please follow us and you'll see this recording as well as all of Paul's work there. Paul, thank you again for taking the time to join us. Great work. Please do keep it up.